I arrived at my sister's wedding, gave my name, and watched the coordinator freeze. She looked at her clipboard, then at me. I am sorry, but you were removed from the guest list this morning. I looked up to see my mother and sister watching from the veranda. My mother smiled that cold, familiar smile. Why would we invite someone who is not really family? I nodded once. Then today is the last time you will ever see me as family. I turned around and left. But exactly 20 minutes later, right in the middle of their vows, my mother's phone started ringing, non-stop. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who treated you like an outsider. My name is Maya, I am 32 years old, and I run a highly successful financial crisis management firm. But to my mother, Brenda, and my younger sister Chloe, I was always just the dark-skinned mistake from a previous marriage. I pulled up to the gated entrance of the Magnolia Estate, a sprawling, luxurious venue that charged an absolute fortune just to walk on the grass. I was wearing a custom-tailored charcoal suit, looking sharp, feeling ready to support my sister on her big day. Chloe was marrying Connor, a tech entrepreneur from a supposedly wealthy white family. My mother had been bragging about this union for an entire year, acting like Chloe marrying into white wealth was the ultimate prize that somehow elevated our entire bloodline. They worshipped proximity to status and money, while I had always been expected to work twice as hard just to be acknowledged. It was a classic case of colorism and toxic family dynamics, and I had always been the designated scapegoat. I stepped out of my car and approached the grand entrance. The coordinator asked for my name. When I said, Maya, she froze. She checked her list, her face turning pale. I am so sorry, she stammered, looking incredibly uncomfortable. Your name has been crossed off. Someone explicitly requested security not to let you in. Before I could even process the humiliation, the heavy oak doors opened. My mother Brenda and my sister Chloe stepped out into the sunlight. Chloe was drowning in a $15,000 custom lace gown, and Brenda was wearing a mother of the bride dress that looked like it cost a down payment on a house. Brenda looked me up and down, her eyes full of undisguised disgust. I told the coordinator to remove you, Brenda said, her voice dripping with venom. Look at you, Maya. We are about to merge with Connor's family. They are high society. Your dark skin, your edgy suit, your whole vibe. It just does not fit the perfect aesthetic we are going for today. I stared at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling a familiar ache in my chest. You are kicking me out of my sister's wedding because I am too dark and wearing a suit. Chloe laughed, adjusting her expensive veil. Do not make it a racial thing, Maya. You just do not belong here. You never did. Plus, his parents are very traditional. We do not want to explain why my half-sister looks so different from us. Brenda nodded, crossing her arms tightly. You are not really family anyway. Your father abandoned us. Connor's family expects perfection, and I will not let you ruin Chloe's big day with your aggressive energy. The words were meant to completely crush me. Years ago they would have. I would have cried, begged for their approval, tried to shrink myself down to fit their toxic standards. They expected me to absorb the insult, to apologize for existing, and to quietly walk away so they could continue their charade. I had spent my 20s paying the black tax, constantly bailing them out financially just to earn a scrap of their love. But I was not that scared little girl anymore. I looked at Chloe's smug face, at the massive diamond ring she was flaunting. That is a beautiful gown, Chloe, I said, keeping my voice completely level and calm. Almost as beautiful as the clean criminal record you have right now. Her smile vanished instantly. I took a deliberate step closer, lowering my voice so the coordinator could not hear. Did you tell Connor's traditional high society parents about the time you were arrested for shoplifting designer bags last year? Did you tell them how you called me from the police station crying hysterically, begging me to pay the quiet legal fees to get it expunged so your precious tech bro boyfriend would not find out? Brenda stepped in front of Chloe, her face red with sudden panic. How dare you bring that up today? We are your family, Maya. You are supposed to help us. I tilted my head, studying them both with pure clarity. I thought I was not really family. You cannot have it both ways, Brenda. You cannot treat me like an unwanted stranger at the front door and a walking bank account at the back door. I did not scream. I did not cause the loud scene they desperately wanted so they could call me angry and unstable. I simply nodded once, making eye contact with both of them. Then today is the last time you will ever see me as family. I turned on my heel and walked straight back to my armored SUV. I climbed into the driver's seat, the heavy doors, shutting out the sounds of the venue. I pulled out my phone and opened a secure messaging app. I typed a single message to my lead assistant. Execute Protocol 0, revoke the Magnolia Estate anonymous guarantor hold immediately. Hit send. What Brenda and Chloe did not know, what they never bothered to ask about my business, was that my investment firm was the parent company that owned the Magnolia Estate. When Brenda's credit had been quietly declined months ago, she had cried to the venue that it was a bank error. I had secretly stepped in and put my own firm's black card on file as a silent guarantor so my sister could have her dream wedding. But if I was not family, I was not paying for the privilege of being abused. Inside the venue, the string quartet began to play. The guests were seated. Chloe walked down the aisle looking like the picture of perfection, her arm linked with our mother's. Connor stood at the altar smiling his charming, wealthy smile. The priest opened his book, ready to begin the solemn vows. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the ceremony hall slammed open. The music screeched to a halt. Connor's parents gasped in horror, their perfect, wealthy facade crumbling in an instant. The venue manager, a strict woman who did not tolerate financial nonsense, marched straight down the aisle with her tablet in hand. She did not whisper. She did not pull them aside to protect their dignity. She grabbed the microphone directly from the priest's stand. Her voice echoed through the massive hall, reaching the ears of every single high society guest. "I am incredibly sorry to interrupt," the manager announced, her tone icy and loud. "But this wedding is suspended immediately. Brenda, your exclusive black card just bounced for fraud. The $85,000 deposit has been completely revoked by the guarantor. We need full payment right now or security will clear this room." The absolute silence that followed the venue manager's announcement was deafening. Every eye in the Magnolia Estate courtyard shifted from the beautiful floral altar to my mother. Brenda stood frozen, her jaw hanging open while the color drained from her face. Chloe clutched her custom bouquet so tightly, her knuckles turned pale white. But the most satisfying reaction came from Connor's parents, sitting in the very front row. These were the wealthy white elites my mother had worshipped and catered to for the past year. Now his mother clutched her pearls, looking at Brenda with pure, unadulterated disgust. His father leaned over, whispering something that clearly judged our entire family. The perfect upper-class facade my mother had sacrificed my mental health to build was crumbling in front of 200 guests. Inside my armored SUV parked just outside the main gates, I watched the entire scene unfold on my tablet. As the owner of the parent company, I had full administrative access to the venue security cameras. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water from the mini fridge and turned up the volume on my dashboard console. My phone began vibrating violently against the leather console. It was Brenda. I let it go straight to voicemail. Less than 10 seconds later, the automated transcript popped up on my screen. "Maya, you vindictive little brat, I know you did this. You are cursing this wedding with your dark, jealous, bitter energy because you cannot stand seeing your light-skinned sister get everything you will never have. Call your bank and fix this immediately before you completely ruin our reputation." I deleted the unhinged voicemail without a second thought. My phone immediately rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Aunt Patrice and Uncle Marcus. I decided to answer, putting them on speakerphone so I could hear the panic in their voices. "Maya, what on earth is wrong with you?" Aunt Patrice screamed over the line. "I can hear the venue staff threatening to kick everyone out right now." Uncle Marcus chimed in, his voice deep and demanding. "You need to wire $85,000 to this venue immediately, Maya. Do you have any idea how bad this makes us look? You are embarrassing the entire black side of the family in front of these wealthy white folks. You have the money, so you have a duty to fix this. You cannot let them treat us like we are broke. This is your obligation." I stared at the dashboard, my expression entirely blank. "You are right, Aunt Patrice," I said calmly. I do have the money. But Brenda made it perfectly clear at the door that I am not really family. So why would I pay family taxes for total strangers? Before they could scream another toxic word, I tapped the screen and disconnected the call. I turned my attention back to the high-definition security feed. Things at the altar were escalating rapidly. The venue manager was tapping her foot, holding out the mobile's payment terminal. Brenda was crying real tears now, grabbing Connor by the arm. "Connor, please do something," Brenda begged, her voice trembling. "You are a tech millionaire. Use your tech money to cover the bill. Save Chloe's special day. Just put it on your card and I promise I will pay you back later." Connor was sweating profusely. His charismatic smile had completely vanished, replaced by sheer animal panic. He patted his tailored tuxedo jacket, pulling out a sleek leather wallet. He produced a heavy platinum card and handed it to the manager. His wealthy parents watched from the front row, their expressions tight with severe judgment. The manager swiped the card. A loud, obnoxious beep echoed through the silent courtyard. "Declined," she announced clearly. Connor swallowed hard, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Try this one," he mumbled, handing her a second card. The manager swiped it. Another loud beep. "Declined again," she stated, her voice projecting over the murmuring crowd. Connor's hands were shaking now as he fumbled for a third card. "Please, there must be a bank error," he stammered. "Run it one more time." The manager swiped the third card. The longest, loudest beep yet rang out. "Declined," she said, crossing her arms. 3 different cards and not a single dollar of available credit. "Your tech money seems to be completely fictional, sir." Chloe burst into hysterical sobs, dropping her bouquet on the grass. She looked at Connor as if he were a total stranger. Connor's white parents stood up, looking absolutely humiliated by their son's lack of funds. They began marching down the aisle toward the exit, refusing to look at their own child. Brenda was hyperventilating, clutching her chest as she realized her wealthy white savior son-in-law was entirely broke. The ultimate prize she had traded my dignity for was nothing but a cheap illusion. But the absolute destruction of their perfect day was not even close to finished. Before the guests could even stand up to leave, the sound of screeching tires drowned out Chloe's sobbing. I looked through my windshield as a fleet of 4 black, unmarked federal vehicles bypassed the front gates and roared directly onto the venue lawn. Deep tire tracks tore through the pristine grass my mother had obsessed over. Over a dozen agents wearing tactical vests, with FBI printed across their backs, poured out of the heavy vehicles. The guests shrieked and scattered in pure terror. Brenda threw her hands up, assuming the venue manager had called the police over the unpaid bill. She ran forward screaming, "Please, we will get the money, just do not arrest us." The federal agents completely ignored her. They marched straight past Brenda, brushing her aside like she was nothing. They stormed up the white-carpeted aisle, heading directly for the altar. Connor took one look at them and tried to bolt. He did not make it. 2 agents tackled him hard. I smiled. Perfect. I watched federal agents drag Connor away through my dashboard monitor, taking a sip of water before putting my SUV in drive. By the time I reached my secure penthouse in the financial district, the sun was setting, casting a glow over the skyline. I poured myself a glass of expensive Cabernet Sauvignon, enjoying the silence of my sanctuary. That silence did not last long. The heavy brass knocker on my front door began to rattle violently, accompanied by frantic, muffled screaming from the hallway. My private security panel flashed red. The concierge had not buzzed anyone up, which meant Brenda and Chloe had somehow tailgated a resident through the private elevator access to reach my floor. I took a sip of wine unbothered and tapped the screen to unlock the reinforced door. Brenda shoved the door open, gasping for breath. Chloe stumbled in right behind her, still wearing her $15,000 custom lace gown. The beautiful dress was now ripped at the hems, smeared with dirt and grass stains from the outdoor venue. Her veil hung sideways, tangling in her perfectly styled hair. They looked like the tragic aftermath of a natural disaster, but their sheer entitlement was still fully intact. Brenda pointed a shaking finger directly at me. "You are going to fix this right now," she demanded, her voice echoing off my vaulted ceilings. "Get on your phone and call your high-powered lawyer friends immediately. You run a crisis management firm, Maya. You know important people in the federal government. You need to bail Connor out tonight before the media gets hold of this horrible story. I leaned back against my marble kitchen island, swirling the dark red wine in my glass. Why on earth would I do that? I asked calmly. Brenda slammed her designer handbag onto my clean counter. Because you owe this family, she screamed. You made it out of the neighborhood and became a millionaire. You have an absolute obligation to protect us. This is what successful Black women are supposed to do for their relatives. Do not stand there in your luxury penthouse and pretend you do not have a duty to your own blood. We are supposed to look out for each other. You always think you are better than us, just because you wear expensive suits and live downtown. Connor is your brother-in-law, and you are going to use your vast resources to get him out of federal custody so Chloe can have her husband back. If you do not do this right now, I will make sure everyone we know understands exactly how selfish and ungrateful you truly are. I set my wine glass down with a sharp clink that made Chloe flinch. I walked over to my wall safe and input the biometric passcode and pulled out a thick manila folder. I tossed the heavy financial dossier onto the marble island right next to Brenda's handbag. He is not her husband, I corrected smoothly. The wedding was halted before the vows were finalized, and he is certainly not a tech entrepreneur. Chloe marched up to the island, her tear-streaked face twisting with blind rage. Shut up, Maya, she yelled. Connor is a brilliant genius. His startup is worth millions of dollars. His family has generational wealth. You are just trying to ruin my life because no wealthy man would ever look twice at you. You are incredibly bitter and entirely jealous of my relationship. I slid the dossier across the marble so it stopped right in front of Chloe's trembling hands. Read it, I instructed softly. Connor's tech company does not exist. He runs a low-level Ponzi scheme targeting vulnerable elderly investors. He has been moving stolen money through offshore shell accounts for the past 3 years. His wealthy white parents cut him off financially a decade ago. He is drowning in extreme debt and looking at 20 years in federal prison. Brenda scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. You are making this up. The FBI arrested him over a simple misunderstanding. You probably called in a fake tip just to embarrass us. I smiled, leaning forward so I was eye level with my mother. I did not call in a fake tip, Brenda. My company was hired by a group of defrauded investors to track down their missing retirement funds. We are the anonymous forensic accounting firm that compiled his fraudulent banking records and handed them directly to the federal authorities. I have been investigating your precious golden boy for 6 long months. I knew exactly who he was the very day you brought him to dinner and paraded him around as the supreme savior of our entire family. Chloe let out a piercing shriek, covering her ears tightly. You are a disgusting liar, she screamed, crying hysterically now. Connor loves me deeply. He was going to take me to Paris for our honeymoon. He bought me a massive 2-carat diamond ring. He would never lie to me. You are just a vindictive, hateful person who desperately wants to see me miserable. You set him up. I pulled my phone from my pocket and unlocked the bright screen. Connor is a parasite, I said coldly. And you were nothing but a convenient host. He did not love you, Chloe. I was actively using you to pay off his severe criminal debts. I tapped an audio file on my screen. This is a secret wiretap recording from Connor's burner phone obtained legally by federal investigators last week. I turned the volume all the way up and pressed play. Connor's panicked voice echoed clearly through the quiet penthouse kitchen. Listen, just give me 2 more weeks, he begged the person on the other end of the line. I am handling the situation. I just have to tolerate Chloe until her mom hands over that $500,000 family trust she promised. Chloe turned slowly to Brenda. What $500,000 trust? Chloe's loud voice trembled as she backed away from our mother. I asked you a direct question, Brenda. We never had a trust fund. Brenda looked like she was going to be sick. Her eyes darted around my penthouse, looking anywhere but at her favorite daughter. I had to do it. Chloe. Brenda stammered, her perfectly manicured hands shaking. He came from such a good white family. I could not let him slip away. I had to make sure you secured that ring so our family could finally have some real status. Chloe grabbed Brenda by the shoulders. Where did you get $500,000? Brenda finally cracked. She collapsed against one of my velvet bar stools, sobbing loudly. I took out a second mortgage, she wailed. I used the ancestral home. the house your great-grandfather built. I found a private lender and took out a predatory loan against the equity to offer Connor a dowry. I needed him to marry you to elevate our bloodline. I was going to pay it back once you two were settled and he shared his wealth. I swear I was going to fix it. Chloe let out a gut-wrenching scream. You mortgaged the family house to bribe a scammer to marry me. You sold our legacy for a fake white tech, bro. The heavy front door to my penthouse swung open before Chloe could even finish her sentence. Aunt Patrice marched right in, having clearly followed them up from the lobby. She must have been listening in the hallway because she did not hesitate to insert herself directly into the chaos. Patrice ignored Brenda sobbing on the floor and turned her furious gaze directly onto me. This is all your fault, Maya Patrice yelled, jabbing a finger in my direction. You sit up here in this multi-million-dollar penthouse sipping wine while your own mother is forced to go to loan sharks. If you actually cared about your blood, you would have just given her the money. You have millions of dollars sitting in the bank. Why did you not just fund your sister's wedding so your mother would not have to borrow against the family home? You are a cold-blooded, selfish monster. You watched her drown and did absolutely nothing. I did not yell back. I never let them pull me into their loud, chaotic frequency. Instead, I turned around and walked over to the biometric wall safe hidden behind a modern art canvas in my dining area. I pressed my thumb against the scanner. The heavy steel door clicked open. I reached inside and pulled out a single crisp document encased in a protective leather folder. I walked back to the kitchen island and tossed it down right next to the financial dossier that had just ruined Connor's life. Look at the signature, Patrice, I commanded, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous volume. Look at it right now. Patrice snatched the folder up, her eyes scanning the legal text. Brenda stopped crying and looked up. Chloe wiped her ruined makeup, staring at the paper. What is that? Chloe asked, her voice cracking. Patrice's hands began to shake as she read the bold print. She dropped the paper onto the marble as if it had burned her. It is the deed, she whispered, looking at Brenda in absolute horror. The original property deed to the ancestral house. Brenda scrambled off the floor, snatching the document. No, she gasped. That is impossible. The private lender holds the deed. The bank said I had time to catch up on the payments. I smiled, leaning forward and resting my hands on the cool marble counter. You defaulted on that predatory loan exactly 6 months ago, Brenda. The lender was going to auction off our great-grandfather's legacy to the highest bidder to turn it into cheap condos. So I stepped in. I used a shell company to buy your toxic debt in cash. I did not give you the money because you are a financial parasite who would have just wasted it on another pathetic attempt to buy social status. I protected the only thing of value this family ever created. I am the legal owner of the ancestral house. I am your landlord. Brenda clutched the deed to her chest. You cannot do this, she cried out, panicked. You cannot steal the family home from me. I did not steal anything, I corrected sharply. I saved it from your crippling obsession with white validation. You were willing to trade a century of black excellence just to buy a fake tech genius who could not afford his own wedding deposit. You endangered your own roof just to make sure Chloe did not have to work for a living. That is a sickness, Brenda. Aunt Patrice stepped forward, her tone shifting to a whine. Now, Maya, let us be reasonable here. We are all family. We always forgive each other. You have the house now, so everything is fine. We can just go back there and figure out a payment plan. You make enough money to let her stay. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a second piece of paper folded in thirds. I slid it across the table, stopping it in front of Brenda. You made it very clear at the venue today, I said, my voice absolute. You looked me right in the eyes and told me I was not really family because my skin was too dark to fit your wealthy aesthetic. You chose your side. Since I am not family, I have absolutely no obligation to house strangers. Brenda stared down at the paper as if it were a loaded weapon. Chloe let out another sob, realizing exactly what it was. Aunt Patrice covered her mouth in shock. You have a 30-day eviction notice, I stated, locking eyes with the woman who gave birth to me. Your time is up, Brenda. Pack your things. Brenda stared down at the legally binding eviction notice, her hands shaking so violently the paper rattled. Then her face contorted into something wild and feral. With a guttural scream, she brought the document to her mouth, attempting to tear it with her teeth before shredding it into tiny, ragged pieces with her fingernails. She threw the paper scraps into the air like confetti, panting heavily as they rained down on my pristine hardwood floor. "You cannot evict me," she shrieked, her voice cracking under the strain. "Paper means nothing. I gave birth to you. That house is mine until the day I die." I watched her pathetic display without moving a muscle. Destroying a physical copy does not alter the digital deed recorded with the county clerk, Brenda, I said calmly. "You have 29 days, 23 hours, and 50 minutes left." Aunt Patrice looked at the shredded paper, then at Brenda, and finally at Uncle Marcus, who had been standing silently near the entrance. The reality of Brenda's absolute financial ruin had finally pierced their thick skulls. If Brenda had no house, no money, and no wealthy white son-in-law, she was a massive financial liability. Marcus caught Patrice's eye and gave a subtle nod toward the door. "We should probably get going," Patrice stammered, taking a step backward toward the private elevator. "Marcus has his blood pressure medication to take, and this stress is bad for his heart." "You are leaving me," Brenda gasped, turning to her sister in disbelief. "Patrice, you said we were family. You said we stick together." Patrice did not even look her in the eye. "We have our own household to manage, Brenda," she muttered quickly, tapping the elevator call button. "You need to figure this out with your daughters." The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Marcus and Patrice practically sprinted inside the doors closing before Brenda could even take 3 steps toward them. The toxic allies had abandoned ship the second the money ran out. Chloe sat on the velvet sofa, her torn wedding dress spread around her like a shroud, staring blankly at the floor. The front door, which Patrice had left unlatched in her hurry to escape, clicked open again. Connor stepped into the penthouse. Howe was out on a temporary signature bond paid by his parents' high-priced defense attorney. His tuxedo jacket was gone, his tie was undone, and the charismatic, polished aura he had projected for a year was entirely shattered. He looked desperate, his eyes bloodshot and dark circles bruised under his skin. Chloe gasped, a sudden burst of hope illuminating her tear-stained face. "Connor," she cried out, scrambling off the couch and tripping over her ruined hem as she ran to him. "You came back. Oh, thank God. I knew you would come for me. I told Maya you loved me. We can still run away together. We can fix this." She reached out to touch his arm. Connor recoiled as if a stray dog had tried to lick him. He shoved her hands away so hard she stumbled backward against the marble island. "Get the hell off me, Chloe!" Connor snapped, his tone laced with absolute disgust. "Stop touching me with your filthy crying face." Chloe froze, her mouth agape. "Connor, what are you saying?" "I am saying you are an idiot!" Connor spat, dropping his fake, refined accent entirely to reveal a sharp, bitter cadence. "You and your ridiculous mother. I spent a year listening to you whine about your social media followers and listening to her brag about her fake status, all because she promised me a $500,000 trust fund. I tolerated your total lack of intellect because I thought your family actually had equity. You are completely broke. Your house is gone. Your mother is an evicted pauper and you are a worthless, uneducated child. I do not love you. I never even liked you." Chloe collapsed onto the floor, clutching her stomach as if he had physically stabbed her. Brenda let out a weak gasp, too emotionally drained from her own eviction to even defend her golden child. Connor did not give Chloe another glance. He stepped right over her tattered veil, walking straight past her toward the kitchen island where I stood. He completely ignored the sobbing woman on the floor and turned his full attention to me. "Maya," he said, his voice instantly shifting to a smooth, manipulative register. "You and I are the only smart people in this room. We know how the world really works. These two are dead weight. Parasites. You know business, and I know high finance structures." I leaned back against the counter, crossing my arms. "Is that so, Connor?" He leaned over the island, dropping his voice to an urgent whisper. "The feds think they froze everything, but they missed a private server. I have $8 million held in an encrypted, non-custodial offshore wallet in the Cayman Islands. But I cannot move it without a legitimate corporate entity to process the clean-side transactions. Your crisis management firm has the institutional prestige and the regulatory clearance. You help me wash that offshore money through your firm's accounts. Clear my name with your federal connections, and I will give you a clean 30%. That is $2.4 million pure cash in your pocket tonight. We leave these two useless women in the gutter where they belong." Chloe let out a fresh wave of agonizing sobs from the floor, hearing her dream man casually negotiate her total abandonment. I looked at Connor, studying the desperate greed in his eyes. I walked over to the bar cart, picked up a crystal decanter, and poured him 2 fingers of aged scotch. I handed the glass to him. So $2.4 million to launder stolen funds and obstruct a federal investigation, I said, my voice smooth and relaxed. Connor took a eager sip of the scotch, a victorious smirk spreading across his face. Exactly. A victimless crime. We win, they lose. I smiled, a slow, cold expression that did not reach my eyes. I raised my left hand, lifting the sleeve of my silk blouse, just enough to expose my custom platinum smartwatch, which was pulsing with a steady, rhythmic blue light. Then I reached up to my throat and adjusted a delicate diamond pendant resting against my collarbone. I think the FBI field agents listening to the live wire inside this necklace just got all the explicit probable cause they needed to freeze your Cayman accounts, Connor, I said gently. Thank you for the full confession. Connor stared at the diamond pendant resting against my collarbone as if it were a venomous snake. The color drained from his face completely. The expensive Scotch glass slipped from his trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor. Without saying a single word, he turned and sprinted toward the private elevator, jabbing the call button with frantic, desperate strikes. When the doors opened, he threw himself inside, fleeing the penthouse like a cornered rat. He knew the federal agents were already tracking his location. Chloe remained on the floor, completely catatonic. Her eyes were glazed over, staring blankly at the spilled scotch and broken glass. In less than an hour, she had lost her fraudulent husband, her fake status, and her stolen inheritance. She was entirely broken, stripped of the unearned arrogance she had worn her entire life. Brenda stood in the center of the living room, breathing heavily. She looked at the open elevator doors, then at Chloe on the floor, and finally at me. Her grand master plan was obliterated. She had mortgaged her ancestral home to buy a scammer. She had publicly disowned me to protect her aesthetic. And now she had absolutely zero leverage. But toxic people do not surrender when they are cornered. They escalate. Brenda let out a guttural sound that was half sob and half scream. Her eyes darted wildly around my immaculate penthouse, looking for a weapon. She spotted a vintage solid steel golf club resting in a custom display case near my floor-to-ceiling windows. Before I could even blink, Brenda lunged across the room and ripped the heavy club from its mounts. "You want to take my house?" Brenda shrieked, swinging the metal club with violent force. "I will destroy yours." The heavy steel head crashed into a custom-blown glass vase, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. Brenda screamed again, swinging the club wildly into a mirrored side table. Glass exploded outward, raining down on the velvet rugs. She was destroying everything in her path, a desperate woman trying to inflict physical pain because her financial manipulation had completely failed. I did not move to stop her. I simply stood behind my kitchen island, watching the chaotic performance unfold. Brenda paused, panting heavily, amidst the wreckage of my living room. She dropped the golf club onto the floor with a loud clatter. Then she reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her phone. She dialed 3 numbers and pressed the phone to her ear. "Please help me," Brenda wailed into the receiver, her voice instantly transforming into a terrified, hysterical sob. "I need police right now. My daughter is attacking me. She is having a severe psychotic break. She is destroying the apartment and threatening to kill us. Please hurry, she is completely out of control." Brenda ended the call and tossed the phone onto the sofa. She looked at me with a sickening, triumphant smirk, but the performance was not over. Brenda rolled up the sleeves of her silk blouse. She raised her right hand and dug her own manicured fingernails deeply into her left forearm. She dragged her nails down hard, breaking the skin and drawing bright red blood. She repeated the violent motion on her other arm, creating deep, jagged scratches. "You are going to jail today," Brenda hissed, panting as blood trickled down her wrists. "I am going to tell them you assaulted me. You attacked your own mother and your sister. They will look at your dark skin and my bleeding arms, and they will lock you away. You will lose your business, your penthouse, and your freedom. Let us see how powerful you are in a prison cell." Chloe finally blinked, snapping out of her trance just long enough to process what Brenda was doing. "Mom, stop," Chloe whispered, shrinking back against the cabinets. Shut up and start crying, Brenda ordered, snapping at her golden child. Look terrified when they walk in. Less than 5 minutes later, heavy boots pounded down the hallway. My security system buzzed as the police bypassed the concierge using an emergency override. The front door burst open. Two uniformed police officers rushed into the penthouse, their hands resting firmly on their holstered weapons. The scene they walked into was perfectly curated by Brenda to trigger every societal bias imaginable. The luxury penthouse was completely trashed. Broken glass littered the floor. Chloe, a light-skinned woman in a torn wedding dress, sat crying hysterically on the floor. Brenda, an older woman with visible bleeding scratches on her arms, was cowering behind the sofa. And then there was me. A confident, dark-skinned woman wearing a tailored suit standing calmly amidst the destruction. The racial profiling kicked in instantly. The officers did not ask what happened. They did not assess the situation neutrally. They took one look at my dark skin, my unbothered posture, and the bleeding women across the room, and made their immediate judgment. "Step back from them right now," one officer shouted, pointing a stern finger directly at me. "Put your hands where I can see them. Do not make any sudden movements." The second officer rushed over to Brenda, his voice softening with immediate concern. "Ma'am, are you all right? Did she do this to you?" "Yes," Brenda sobbed, clutching the officer's arm and pointing a trembling finger at me. "She went completely crazy. She attacked us with that golf club and scratched my arms. We were terrified for our lives. Please, you have to arrest her. She is dangerous." The first officer pulled a pair of heavy metal handcuffs from his belt and took a threatening step toward me. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," he commanded, his tone laced with aggressive authority. "You are under arrest for domestic assault and battery." I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or attempt to explain myself. I knew exactly how this game was played, and I knew that raising my voice would only give them the angry black woman narrative they were actively looking for. Instead, I kept my hands visible and slowly picked up a small silver remote resting on the marble counter. "Do not touch anything," the officer barked, grabbing his radio. "I just want to show you the evidence," I said, keeping my tone incredibly soft and compliant. I pressed a single button on the silver remote. A massive 85-inch high-definition screen dropped down smoothly from the ceiling right behind the officers. The room darkened slightly as a crystal-clear 4K artificial intelligence-enhanced security feed flashed onto the massive display. The footage showed the exact room we were standing in, rewinded by exactly 7 minutes. The officers froze, looking at the giant screen. They watched in stunning, ultra-high definition as Brenda grabbed the golf club. They watched her violently smash my expensive vases and mirrored tables while I stood completely still. The audio piped clearly through the surround sound speakers, capturing Brenda's voice making the fake emergency call. And finally, the screen showed Brenda rolling up her own sleeves and maliciously dragging her sharp nails down her own flesh, drawing her own blood. The footage looped, repeating Brenda's sinister threat. "They will look at your dark skin and my bleeding arms, and they will lock you away." The entire penthouse fell dead silent. The audio recording of Brenda's vile scheme echoed off the walls. I set the remote down on the marble counter, locking eyes with the two police officers. "I believe filing a false police report and destruction of private property are serious offenses, gentlemen," I said calmly. The officer holding the handcuffs slowly lowered his arms. He looked at the giant screen displaying the undeniable truth. Then he turned around, his expression hardening into pure professional anger as he faced my mother. He gripped the metal cuffs tightly, stepping away from me and marching directly toward the woman who had just tried to frame her own daughter. "Put your hands behind your back, Brenda," he ordered. "You are under arrest." Brenda thrashed against the heavy metal cuffs as the officer locked them securely around her bleeding wrists. She screamed that this was a mistake, that the video was doctored, that I was an evil, ungrateful child who had orchestrated this entire nightmare. The officers ignored her frantic lies, completely devoid of the sympathy they had offered just 10 minutes earlier. They read Brenda her Miranda rights while marching her toward the private elevator. Chloe trailed behind them, clutching the ripped layers of her $15,000 wedding gown, sobbing uncontrollably as the stainless steel elevator doors closed on our mother. I did not stay in the ruined penthouse. I took the service elevator down to the lobby to personally ensure they were escorted off my property. The timing could not have been more poetic. Word of Connor being tackled by federal agents at the Magnolia estate had already leaked to the local press. A swarm of paparazzi and aggressive reporters had gathered outside my exclusive building, hoping to catch a glimpse of the disgraced bride and the shattered wedding party. When the glass lobby doors opened, the flashbulbs erupted like a strobe light. Brenda, the woman who had sacrificed her ancestral home and her own daughter just to buy her way into high society, was paraded out in handcuffs. The elite residents of my building, the wealthy executives and socialites Brenda had desperately wanted to impress, stopped in their tracks. They watched in sheer disgust as the police shoved my mother into the back of a squad car. Chloe tried to hide her face behind her ruined veil, but the cameras captured every humiliating second. I went back upstairs, poured myself a fresh glass of Cabernet, and watched the evening unfold online. I knew Chloe would not stay quiet. She had built her entire identity on being the beautiful light-skinned golden child who deserved endless sympathy and adoration. By 10 o'clock that night, Chloe went live on social media. She had clearly spent time preparing the scene. She was sitting in what looked like a cheap motel room, probably paid for by a desperate friend. She wore a simple oversized sweater. Her hair pulled back, her mascara carefully smudged, just enough to look devastated, but still perfectly attractive. The performative tears flowed instantly. Chloe looked directly into her phone camera and spun the most malicious fairy tale I had ever heard. She told her 2 million followers that her wealthy, powerful sister had orchestrated a hostile takeover of their lives. She painted me as a jealous, dark-skinned tyrant who hated our mother and resented Chloe for finding true love. She claimed I had manipulated federal agents to ruin her wedding out of pure spite, and then fabricated video evidence to have our innocent mother thrown into a dirty jail cell. Chloe stared into the lens, her voice trembling with practiced vulnerability, and begged her followers for help. She dropped a crowdfunding link pinned to the top of the chat, claiming she needed emergency funds to save her family from homelessness and false imprisonment. The internet is a volatile beast, and Chloe knew exactly how to feed it. People love a tree, especially when it involves a wealthy villain and a beautiful weeping victim. The donations started pouring in instantly. Within the first hour, the campaign hit $20,000. By midnight, it crossed 50,000. When I woke up the next morning and checked my tablet, the fund had exploded past $100,000, and the video was trending across every major social media platform. My phone buzzed persistently on the marble counter. It was a conference call from my firm executive partners. I answered, placing them on speaker. Maya, we have a rapidly escalating situation. My senior partner Marcus warned, his voice tight with anxiety. The public relations fallout from your sister viral video is threatening to bleed over into our corporate accounts. We have high-profile clients asking questions about your mother arrest and these allegations of financial abuse. We need to issue a press release or send a cease and desist immediately before this damages the firm. I walked over to my coffee maker, completely unbothered by the digital chaos. I handle catastrophic financial crises for a living, Marcus, I said, pouring a fresh cup of dark roast. My own sister throwing a tantrum on the internet is not a crisis. It is an opportunity. Do not issue a statement. Let her keep talking. Let the money keep rolling into that account. I ended the call and dialed a different number. I contacted my lead cybersecurity director, a brilliant tech operative named David, who handled forensic data extraction for our wealthiest clients. David, I need you to run a deep dive routing trace on the crowdfunding link my sister just posted. I instructed, watching the donation ticker climb higher on my monitor. I want to know exactly which financial institution is receiving that money and who the primary account holder is. David did not ask questions. He simply agreed and promised to call me back. I spent the next 2 hours directing my cleaning staff to sweep up the broken glass and shattered vases Brenda had left behind. My peaceful sanctuary was being carefully restored piece by single piece. My phone finally rang. It was finally David calling. His voice sounded unusually tense over the encrypted line. Maya, I intercepted the routing data from the crowdfunding platform, he said slowly. Chloe is not the beneficiary. The receiving bank account is not in her name at all. I frowned, wiping down the marble island. Then whose name is on the account? Did Brenda set up a shell account before she was arrested? No, David replied, a hard edge creeping into his professional tone. The account receiving the $100,000 is registered under your name, Maya. It was opened exactly 10 years ago using your exact social security number without your knowledge or consent. I ended the call with David and stared at the glowing monitor in my office. My own mother had stolen my social security number 10 years ago. She ruined my early credit, saddled me with hidden debts, and used my identity to build a fraudulent financial safety net for her golden child. The sheer audacity of her betrayal did not break my heart. It completely eliminated whatever tiny fraction of mercy I had left. I grabbed my designer coat and marched to the private elevator. I had a visit to make before Brenda could post her bail. The county holding facility smelled of bleach and stale sweat. It was a massive concrete fortress that stripped away every ounce of upper-class illusion. I walked through the heavy security doors wearing a pristine white suit that commanded immediate respect from the guards. They escorted me to the maximum security visitation room. I sat down in a rigid metal chair facing a thick wall of bulletproof plexiglass. A few minutes later, the heavy steel door on the other side clicked open. A female guard shoved Brenda into the small visitation booth. My mother was wearing a bright orange jail jumpsuit. Her expensive designer extensions were tangled, and her makeup was completely smeared down her cheeks. The wealthy matriarch who had banned me from a wedding for ruining her elite aesthetic now looked like a common criminal. She picked up the black plastic telephone receiver attached to the wall. I picked up mine. "Are you here to bail me out?" Brenda snapped, her voice sharp and demanding through the harsh audio receiver. "Chloe told me the crowdfunding campaign is going viral. We have over $100,000 already. You need to wire that money to the bail bondsman right now so I can get out of this filthy place and sue you for false imprisonment." I did not say a word. I simply reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of printed banking records. I slapped the documents flat against the bulletproof plexiglass right in front of her face. Brenda squinted at the papers. Her arrogant scowl faltered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly recovered, smoothing out her orange jumpsuit. "You opened this bank account exactly 10 years ago," I said, my voice low and dangerously calm. "You used my exact social security number and forged my digital signature to establish a shadow credit line. You committed federal identity theft against your own 18-year-old daughter." Brenda rolled her eyes and let out a dismissive scoff. "Oh, please, Maya, do not be so incredibly dramatic. It is not identity theft when it is your own child. You were living under my roof, eating my food, and using my electricity. I needed good credit to secure loans for Chloe to attend that elite private academy. She needed luxury cars and designer clothes to fit in with the wealthy white girls. You were just a dark-skinned burden who was never going to marry into money anyway." I stared at her, letting the absolute poison of her colorism and toxic manipulation hang in the stale air. "You ruined my credit score for 5 years," I stated, gripping the telephone receiver tightly. "I had to work 3 miserable jobs in college just to pay for my textbooks, because every student loan application was immediately denied due to the hidden debt you piled onto my name." "Consider it back pay," Brenda sneered, leaning closer to the glass. "It was compensation for keeping such an ungrateful, exhausting child. I gave you life, Maya. That means your assets, your credit, and your success belong to me. Now stop wasting my time and process the withdrawal from that GoFundMe account. I need my bail money today before the evening news runs another humiliating story about me." I let a slow, chilling smile spread across my face. I looked down at my manicured nails and then back up into her demanding eyes. "I think you misunderstand how the banking system works," Brenda, I said softly. "What are you talking about?" she barked, gripping the plastic phone tighter. "When Chloe set up that viral GoFundMe campaign, she linked it directly to the bank account. You fraudulently opened using my social security number," I explained, keeping my tone strictly professional. "You thought you were incredibly clever hiding assets under my identity, but you made a catastrophic tactical error." Brenda stopped breathing. The color completely drained from her face. "Because that account is legally registered under my federal identity. I have absolute lawful jurisdiction over every penny inside it. I logged into my banking portal and transferred the entire $100,000 balance. No, Brenda gasped, slamming her free hand against the thick plexiglass. You cannot do that. That money is for my bail. That money is to save our family. I legally donated every cent to an offshore charity trust that protects victims of financial abuse, I said, watching her world collapse. The money is completely gone, Brenda. It has been processed, cleared, and permanently locked away. You have absolutely $0 to your name. Chloe and your toxic sisters cannot ever bail you out. You are completely bankrupt right now. Brenda dropped the heavy plastic telephone receiver. It dangled by its long metal cord. I heard her muffled shrieks through the thick barrier as she thrashed against the small confines of the booth. I calmly placed my telephone receiver back onto its metal hook. I stood up and smoothed out my pristine white suit. I stepped right up to the glass, leaning in close so she could read my lips perfectly over her own agonizing screams. Enjoy your bail hearing, Brenda, I mouthed, clearly tapping the glass. The federal IRS agent I forwarded your 10-year fraudulent tax history to is waiting right outside the courtroom. I slowly turned my back on her frantic screaming and walked out of the visitation room. Leaving Brenda to scream her lungs out against the thick plexiglass. Her frantic rage was no longer my problem. It took Brenda another 6 agonizing hours to secure a shady bail bondsman using the very last of her hidden emergency cash reserves. She walked out of the county jail exhausted, but still clinging tightly to her toxic arrogance. She ordered a cab back to the ancestral family home, fully expecting to immediately start plotting her revenge. She assumed she still had time to fight the eviction. She assumed completely wrong. Brenda pulled up to the property and stepped out of the cab only to freeze in absolute horror. The pristine front lawn was swarming with federal agents wearing dark windbreakers with IRS printed in bold yellow letters across their broad backs. A heavy-duty commercial tow truck was currently hooking up the front axle of her leased white Mercedes SUV. 2 agents were marching out the front door carrying heavy cardboard boxes filled with her financial files. Another agent was rolling a massive industrial cart loaded with dozens of her precious designer handbags, luxury watches, and expensive jewelry boxes. Brenda sprinted across the grass, screaming at the top of her lungs, demanding they drop her belongings immediately. She threatened to sue them for trespassing and police harassment. The lead investigating agent simply turned around and handed her a thick, heavily stapled document. He informed her in a loud, clear voice that a decade of fraudulent tax returns filed under a stolen Social Security number had triggered an immediate federal asset forfeiture. Because Brenda had used my identity to hide her income and dodge federal taxes, the government was legally seizing every single luxury item purchased during that 10-year period to cover the massive financial penalties. She dropped to her knees, clutching the seizure warrant as she watched her upper-class identity being loaded into a government van. She was left with absolutely nothing but the orange jail jumpsuit under her winter coat. While Brenda was losing her physical kingdom, Chloe was experiencing her own rapid, terrifying descent into total poverty. Sitting in a cheap suburban diner, trying to hide her face from the public, Chloe felt her phone vibrating endlessly. She eagerly unlocked the screen, hoping to see more crowdfunding donations rolling in. Instead, she found an urgent email from her influencer management agency. They were formally dropping her from their roster effective immediately. Her lucrative beauty sponsorships were being abruptly canceled. The massive public scandal involving federal tax fraud, identity theft, and a fake wedding had made Chloe entirely toxic to every corporate brand she represented. Panic firmly setting in, Chloe flagged down the waiter to pay for her coffee and cheap breakfast. She handed over her premium gold credit card. The waiter returned a minute later, stating the card was declined. Chloe frantically opened her mobile banking app, only to discover a bright red notification banner across the top of her screen. Every single one of her checking and savings accounts had been frozen by a federal court order, pending the ongoing fraud investigation into her mother. Desperate and terrified, with her mother facing prison and her own money completely gone, Chloe realized she had only one remaining lifeline. She used the very last transit credit on her ride-sharing app and directed the driver to the upscale, highly secured gated community where Connor and his parents lived. Chloe arrived at the sprawling, pristine estate of her supposed in-laws. She rang the heavy brass doorbell, fully expecting the same warm, welcoming smiles they used to give her when they believed she was a wealthy, high-society heiress. She practiced her crying face, ready to play the ultimate victim. The heavy oak door swung open, but there were no warm smiles. Connor's mother stood in the doorway with a look of absolute sheer disdain, flanked by a severe-looking family attorney holding a leather briefcase. Chloe instantly burst into performative tears, begging for a place to sleep and crying about the profound unfairness of her entire miserable situation. She reached out hoping for a maternal hug. Connor's father stepped out onto the porch and laughed a cold, incredibly cruel laugh that stopped Chloe dead in her tracks. He did not offer any form of comfort. Instead, the attorney stepped forward and shoved a thick manila folder directly into Chloe's chest. It was a civil lawsuit. They were officially suing Chloe and Brenda for defrauding their son, claiming Chloe intentionally misrepresented her family financial status to maliciously entrap Connor into marriage. Chloe tried to defend herself, stammering that Connor was the one running a Ponzi scheme. Connor's mother leaned in close and delivered a devastating verbal blow using the exact same racial and classist undertones Brenda had weaponized against me. She coldly stated that people from Chloe's specific background always tried to hustle their way into respectable white families. She sneered, looking Chloe up and down, telling her that having light skin and wearing expensive designer dresses could never actually hide her inherently low-class nature. The wealthy white validation Brenda had literally mortgaged her home to secure was entirely conditional and deeply racist. Connor's mother slammed the heavy door directly in Chloe's face, leaving her standing on the porch, completely shattered and entirely alone. With absolutely nowhere else to turn, the dark sky suddenly opened up, pouring freezing torrential rain across the busy city. Chloe was completely soaked, dragging her ruined designer bag through the downtown streets without a destination. She eventually found herself standing inside the gleaming, towering glass lobby of my highly successful financial crisis management firm. I stepped off my private executive elevator wearing a sharp, beautifully tailored emerald suit, holding a warm cup of black coffee. Chloe, shivering violently and utterly broken, dropped straight to her knees on the wet lobby floor, begging me for a job as a receptionist just to survive the upcoming winter. I looked down at the soaked, shivering woman kneeling on the pristine Italian marble of my corporate lobby. Water dripped from Chloe's matted hair, pooling around her designer shoes. A security guard stepped forward to physically remove her, but I raised a single finger, stopping him in his tracks. Chloe stared up at me with wide, desperate eyes. She reached out, trying to grab the hem of my tailored emerald suit. "Maya, please," she sobbed, her voice echoing off the towering glass walls. "I have absolutely nothing. Connor's family threw me out. My bank accounts are frozen. We are sisters. Black women are supposed to stick together. You have to give me a job. I will answer phones. I will fetch coffee. Just do not leave me on the street." I took a slow sip of my black coffee, letting the bitter warmth ground me. I did not bend down to comfort her. I did not offer her a towel or a sympathetic shoulder. "You are attempting to weaponize sisterhood and racial solidarity only because you have completely run out of options," I stated flatly, stripping away any illusion of warmth. "When you were living in the ancestral home wearing $15,000 gowns and parading your fake white billionaire around, you did not view me as a sister. You viewed me as a dark-skinned peasant who did not fit your aesthetic. Now that you are drenched in rain and entirely bankrupt, you suddenly want to play the loyal black sister trope. It is insulting to my intelligence." Chloe gasped, fresh tears spilling over her cheeks. "But I am family. You owe me a chance to survive." "Stand up, Chloe," I commanded, my voice echoing with absolute authority. She scrambled to her feet, hugging her arms against the freezing air conditioning. "You are asking me for a job." I continued, my tone strictly professional. "But my firm manages catastrophic financial crises for multinational corporations. I only hire competent, highly educated professionals who can operate under extreme pressure. You are a severely compromised liability. You have no college degree, zero administrative skills, and your public image is currently tied to a federal tax fraud investigation and a fake tech billionaire. You bring nothing to my corporate table but absolute chaos and public disgrace. I do not run a charity for failed influencers. Chloe shook her head violently. Mom ruined everything. She lied to us. I paced slowly around her, my heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor. I owe you absolutely nothing, I corrected sharply. And it is time you finally understood why you are standing here dripping wet with zero prospects. You think Brenda loved you because she bought you designer bags and praised your light skin. You think she hated me because I was dark and difficult. But Brenda did not love either of us, Chloe. She set us both up for complete failure. I stopped right in front of her, forcing her to meet my gaze. Brenda tried to destroy me through relentless abuse and financial sabotage. But I used that abuse as fuel to build an empire. She destroyed you through crippling codependency. She made you completely reliant on her approval and her stolen money, so you would never actually learn how to survive on your own. She groomed you to be a beautiful, useless accessory to trade for white wealth. And the second that wealth turned out to be a scam, you became worthless to everyone, including yourself. She clipped your wings and then convinced you that you did not need to fly because she would always carry you. Chloe covered her ears, refusing to listen. No. Mom sacrificed everything for me. She took out that mortgage for my wedding. She loves me. Did she? I asked, pulling a folded document from my suit jacket pocket. When my team intercepted the IRS raid reports yesterday, I had my forensic accountants dig through every single one of Brenda's seized files. I unfolded the heavy paper and shoved it directly against Chloe's chest. Read it. Chloe took the paper with trembling hands. Her eyes scanned the highlighted bank statements. What is this? She whispered, her voice barely audible. This is your college fund, I explained, watching the devastating realization hit her. The one our grandparents set up for you when you were born. The one Brenda claimed was wiped out during the 2008 recession, forcing you to rely on her for everything. Chloe's eyes darted across the ledger. But these withdrawals are from 6 years ago. Where did the money go? Look at the routing numbers, Chloe. Brenda did not lose your college fund in a global recession. She systematically drained it wire by wire to pay for her extensive cosmetic surgeries. That subtle nose job, the liposuction, the expensive chemical peels she got to look like a high society matriarch. She paid for her fake upper-class face using your entire future. She literally stole your education to buy her own vanity. The paper slipped from Chloe's fingers, fluttering down to the wet marble floor. Her breathing grew shallow and rapid. The grand illusion of the loving, sacrificing mother evaporated in an instant. Brenda had not just stolen my identity to fund Chloe's lifestyle. Brenda had robbed Chloe blind to fund her own extreme narcissism. She was the ultimate parasite, feeding on both of her daughters to sustain her delusions of grandeur. Chloe let out a hollow, suffocating gasp. The golden child facade completely shattered, leaving behind nothing but an empty shell of a woman who finally realized she had been nothing but a pawn in a sick, narcissistic game. She reached into her damp pocket and pulled out her smartphone. Her fingers shook violently as she typed out a brief message. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the bright screen. Chloe had sent me a 6-digit passcode and a highly encrypted GPS pin drop. I looked up at her, my expression unreadable. Chloe stared back at me with dead, empty eyes. It is Mom's secret climate-controlled storage locker. Chloe whispered, her voice completely devoid of any emotion. It is where she hides everything the feds do not know about. Take everything. I left Chloe shivering on the wet marble floor of my lobby and walked straight to my armored SUV. The GPS pin she sent led me to an industrial district just outside the city limits. It was a high-security, climate-controlled storage facility, hidden behind a nondescript concrete facade. Exactly the kind of place a seasoned narcissist would use to hoard her stolen treasures away from the prying eyes of the federal government. I parked my vehicle and approached the heavy steel security gate. The keypad blinked with a harsh red light. I punched in the 6-digit code Chloe had texted me. A loud metallic clank echoed through the empty corridor as the heavy door swung open. I walked down the brightly lit hallway until I reached Unit 420. I entered the secondary passcode and pulled up the rolling metal door. The stale air of the storage unit hit my face instantly. I reached out and flicked on the overhead light. What I saw inside made my blood run absolutely cold. Brenda had not just been hiding a few emergency funds. She had constructed an entire fraudulent empire inside this 10 by 10 concrete box. Stacks of bundled $100 bills were crammed into clear plastic bins, representing years of untaxed cash she had skimmed from various predatory loans and illegal credit lines. But the money was not what made my stomach turn. Stacked carefully on a metal shelving unit were dozens of velvet jewelry boxes. I opened one and immediately recognized the heavy gold necklace and emerald earrings that belonged to my late grandmother. Brenda had sworn to the entire ago. She had lied to her own siblings, letting them fight over missing memories, while she hoarded our ancestral history in a dark room. Next to the stolen jewelry was a heavy black filing cabinet. I pulled open the top drawer and found a stash of meticulously forged financial documents, fake property deeds, fraudulent tax returns, and blank credit card applications filed under dozens of different names, including several deceased relatives. Brenda was running a systematic fraud operation that went far beyond just stealing my social security number. She was a generational parasite. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number Brenda was using since her arrest. She answered on the second ring, her voice raspy and paranoid. "Who is this?" she demanded. "I am standing inside Unit 420. I said, my voice dead flat. "The federal agents missed this location, Brenda, but I did not. You have exactly 20 minutes to get here alone. If you bring anyone else or if you fail to show up, I will call the district attorney and hand over every single forged deed and stolen heirloom sitting in this room." I hung up the phone and waited, leaning against the metal shelves. Exactly 18 minutes later, a cheap battered taxi pulled up to the facility gates. Brenda stepped out, and I barely recognized the woman walking toward me. The facade of the wealthy high society matriarch was completely eradicated. She was wearing cheap baggy sweatpants and a stained oversized t-shirt. Her expensive lace front wig was tangled and sitting unevenly on her head. The heavy makeup she used to lighten her complexion and mask her age was completely scrubbed away, revealing the deep, exhausted lines of a woman whose entire fraudulent reality had collapsed. Brenda staggered down the hallway and stopped dead in the doorway of the storage unit. She looked at the open bins of cash and the exposed jewelry boxes. Her eyes darted to the filing cabinet and then finally rested on me. A primal, animalistic rage twisted her features. "You ungrateful little witch!" Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking with pure hatred. "You take everything from me. I sacrificed my entire youth for you and your sister. I gave up my beauty and my freedom to raise you. I built this safety net because nobody else was ever going to protect a black single mother in this world. You owe me this money." Brenda let out a furious roar and lunged directly at me. She raised her fists, aiming to claw at my face, trying to inflict physical damage because her financial manipulation had failed. I did not flinch. I effortlessly dodged to the left, letting her own momentum carry her forward. She crashed hard into the metal filing cabinet, knocking the wind out of her lungs. She crumpled to the concrete floor, gasping for air and clutching her ribs. I did not offer her a hand. Instead, I reached inside my tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick, stapled legal document. I dropped it onto the concrete floor right next to her trembling hands. "That is a legally binding confession," I stated coldly, looking down at her. "It details your decade of identity theft, your predatory mortgage fraud on the ancestral house, and your systematic hoarding of stolen family assets. It includes a full admission of your guilt regarding the fake tax returns you filed under my name." Brenda stared at the document, coughing and spitting onto the floor. "I will never sign that," she hissed, glaring up at me with venomous eyes. "You cannot force me to admit to anything. I will fight you in court, and I will tell the jury how you abused your own mother." I checked my platinum smartwatch. "You have exactly 2 hours to sign that confession and surrender entirely to the authorities," I said, my voice ringing with absolute finality. "If you sign it, I will let the federal prosecutors handle your case through the standard channels. If you do not sign it within 2 hours, I'm going to call the district attorney directly. I will hand over the contents of this entire locker, and I will personally fund a team of elite prosecutors to ensure you receive the absolute maximum federal sentence for every single stolen heirloom and forged document in this room. You will die in a federal penitentiary, Brenda. Brenda slowly pushed herself up onto her knees. She looked at the confession on the floor, then looked up at my tailored suit and my unbothered expression. The realization that she had absolutely no leverage left did not bring her to remorse. It only deepened her toxic pride. She gathered the saliva in her mouth and spat directly at my expensive leather shoes. "Do your worst," she snarled, her face twisting with bitter defiance. "I will never surrender to you." I wiped the spit from my expensive leather shoe. I did not yell. I did not react to her disgusting display of toxic pride. I simply pulled a silk handkerchief from my blazer pocket, wiped the leather clean, and dropped the stained cloth directly onto the cold concrete floor. Then I turned my back on her and walked out of the storage facility. I had given Brenda her one and only chance to surrender with a shred of dignity. She chose war. The remaining 29 days on her eviction notice ticked down rapidly. When day 30 finally arrived, the affluent suburban neighborhood was unnervingly quiet. Brenda had decided to play the ultimate game of chicken. She stubbornly barricaded herself inside the ancestral family home. She dragged heavy antique dressers, mahogany dining chairs, and solid oak tables blocking every single entrance. She honestly believed I would show up at the front porch begging and negotiating. She thought she could drag me into another loud, chaotic screaming match on the front lawn to make me look like the aggressive villain while she played the terrified victim. I did not show up to argue. I stayed in my sleek corporate office sipping a warm cup of green tea. I opened my laptop and pulled up the live feed from the high-definition security cameras I had legally installed on the exterior of my property. I simply picked up my phone and dispatched the county sheriff to execute the lawful writ of possession. Exactly at noon, the quiet suburban street was shattered by the piercing wail of police sirens. 3 heavy squad cars bypassed the circular driveway and parked directly on Brenda's pristine, manicured lawn. Deep, thick tire tracks ripped through the expensive green turf she obsessed over. The flashing blue and red lights immediately drew the attention of the elite neighborhood. Wealthy neighbors stepped out onto their sprawling porches, holding their coffee mugs, watching the grand spectacle unfold. The lead sheriff marched up the brick steps and pounded heavily on the front door, demanding Brenda vacate the premises immediately. Brenda shrieked from inside, claiming she was the rightful owner, and that this was an illegal home invasion. The sheriff did not waste time arguing with a barricaded tenant holding a fake deed. He signaled his deputies, and they brought out a heavy steel battering ram. 2 massive hits shattered the antique doorframe. The heavy wood splintered violently, and the armed deputies stormed into the grand foyer. Brenda was standing in the entryway wearing a full face of expensive makeup and a designer silk dress. She was still desperately clinging to her high society aesthetic, even as the police breached her walls. She grabbed a heavy bronze vase, preparing to throw it at the advancing officers. "Chloe, help me!" Brenda screamed, her voice cracking with sheer panic. "Grab a chair and block the hallway. Do not let them take our house. This belongs to us." But Chloe did not move to help. The golden child stepped out from the kitchen shadows holding 2 large suitcases. She was not wearing designer clothes or expensive jewelry. She wore plain gray sweatpants and a completely flat, dead expression. Chloe walked right past the makeshift barricade, stepping over the splintered wood. She stepped outside onto the porch, directly into the clear view of the whispering neighbors. "Take her," Chloe announced, her voice carrying clearly across the manicured lawns. "She is trespassing. This is not her house anymore." Brenda dropped the bronze vase, staring at her favorite daughter in absolute disbelief. "Chloe, how could you say that?" Brenda wailed, stepping toward the door. "I am your mother. I sacrificed my entire youth to give you this beautiful life. I mortgaged this very house to buy you a wealthy husband." "You did not sacrifice anything," Chloe shouted back, her voice filled with pure venom. "You stole my entire college fund. You drained the financial trust my grandparents left me just to pay for your hidden plastic surgeries. You stole my education to buy yourself a fake upper-class face. You set me up with a scammer who is going to federal prison, and you left me completely bankrupt." The neighbors gasped audibly, covering their mouths in shock. The suburban gossip mill had just received the ultimate prize. Brenda's perfect wealthy facade was completely decimated in front of the exact people she had spent decades trying to impress. The women who Brenda used to look down upon were now pointing and whispering, treating her like a common criminal. Brenda lunged toward the porch, trying to physically silence Chloe, but the deputies moved faster. They tackled her to the hardwood floor, pinning her designer dress against the shattered wood. They yanked her arms behind her back and clamped cold steel handcuffs tightly around her wrists. Brenda kicked and screamed violently, cursing my name, cursing Chloe, and cursing the entire neighborhood. "I will destroy you, Maya," she shrieked, her voice echoing down the street. The deputies dragged her forcefully down the brick steps, parading her past the whispering crowd. She was shoved roughly into the back of a squad car, arrested for severe trespassing and resisting a lawful eviction. I watched the entire chaotic feed from the high-definition monitor in my office. I took a slow sip of tea, enjoying the poetic justice of the moment. Brenda had spent my entire life kicking me out of her heart, and now she was being kicked out of the only place that gave her power. The squad cars drove away, their sirens fading into the distance. Chloe dragged her suitcases down the driveway, walking away without looking back. Within an hour, my private contracting team arrived at the property. They wore heavy boots and carried industrial drills. They drilled thick wooden boards over every single window and replaced all the shattered locks with high-security deadbolts. The ancestral home was sealed shut. Nobody would ever step a foot inside that toxic house again. The heavy oak doors of the federal courthouse swung shut, sealing Connor inside the very justice system he thought his white privilege would forever allow him to evade. His highly publicized wire fraud trial commenced with all the theatrical arrogance one would expect from a scammer, backed by wealthy, desperate parents. Sitting at the defense table in a tailored charcoal suit and a conservative blue tie, Connor played the role of the innocent, frightened tech entrepreneur to absolute perfection. His high-priced defense attorney, a silver-haired shark, hired specifically to manipulate the jury, wasted no time launching into a deeply offensive and calculating opening statement. The defense strategy was entirely built on weaponizing racial and classist stereotypes against my own disgraced family. The attorney paced back and forth in front of the jury box, gesturing wildly as he painted a malicious fictional narrative. He claimed Connor was a naive, brilliant visionary who had been completely duped by a scheming low-income family of grifters. He shamelessly argued that Brenda and Chloe had intentionally seduced Connor, draining his supposed wealth and forcing him into shady financial corners just to fund their lavish aesthetic demands. The attorney leaned heavily on the idea that these black women were calculating predators who saw a polite, wealthy white boy and decided to bleed him dry. He portrayed Connor as a victim of reverse exploitation, desperately trying to keep a demanding, manipulative bride and her greedy mother happy. Connor kept his head bowed, staring at his hands, acting like a broken man who had simply loved the wrong woman. The prosecution let the defense spin their racist, condescending fairy tale without a single objection. They knew exactly what was coming. When the defense finally rested their opening arguments, the lead federal prosecutor stood up, smoothing her blazer. She looked directly at the jury and stated that the government would now call their star expert witness on financial forensics to completely dismantle the defense's fictional narrative. The bailiff called my name. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. I stepped into the aisle wearing a flawless emerald green designer suit, tailored to absolute perfection. The sharp click of my stiletto heels echoed against the marble floors as I walked down the center aisle, exuding sheer, unadulterated power. I did not look like the low-income grifter the defense had just spent an hour describing. I looked like the corporate executioner I was. Connor lifted his head, and the false innocence instantly vanished from his eyes. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and terrified. He grabbed his attorney by the sleeve, whispering frantically, but the lawyer just swatted his hand away, entirely confused by his client's sudden panic. I walked past the defense table, ignoring Connor completely, and stepped into the witness box. I placed my hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and took my seat. The prosecutor approached the stand, holding a massive binder of financial documents. She asked me to state my name and my professional credentials for the record. I looked directly at the jury and introduced myself as the founder and chief executive officer of the forensic accounting firm that had personally unraveled the defendant's international Ponzi scheme. The prosecutor asked me to explain the exact nature of the defendant's financial structures. I did not hold back. I launched into a rapid-fire sequence of undeniable financial facts using surgical precision and devastating corporate terminology. I explained how my firm had traced millions of dollars in defrauded retirement funds through a complex web of decentralized cryptographic ledgers. I broke down how Connor had utilized series limited liability companies registered in the Cayman Islands to bypass federal Know Your Customer regulations. I pointed to the exact dates on the massive projector screen showing the jury the undeniable paper trail. The defense attorney jumped up, shouting an objection, claiming this highly technical testimony was confusing the jury. The federal judge sternly overruled him, instructing me to continue. I turned my attention back to the screen, bringing up a specific timeline of Connor's illegal wire transfers. The defense claims the defendant was manipulated into these crimes by my mother and sister, I said, my voice ringing with cold, absolute authority. However, the forensic metadata tells a completely different story. The defendant established his first offshore shell corporation and began routing stolen funds exactly 3 years and 4 months before he ever created a dating profile and matched with my sister. He was actively running a predatory Ponzi scheme long before he ever met the family. You claim manipulated him. Furthermore, my team analyzed the digital footprint of the women the defense accused of being masterminds. Neither Brenda nor Chloe possessed the basic financial literacy required to file a standard tax return, let alone engineer a highly sophisticated international money laundering syndicate. I clicked a button on my remote, pulling up a new document on the projector. It was the bounced venue deposit from the day of the ruined wedding. The defendant did not fall victim to a greedy family, I stated, locking eyes with Connor across the courtroom. He actively targeted socially desperate women who were obsessed with upper-class aesthetics. He used their blind desire for proximity to white wealth as a shield, intending to use their ancestral home as collateral for his mounting criminal debts. He is not a victim. He is a calculated, highly organized predator. The courtroom erupted into shocked whispers. The defense attorney furiously shuffled through his notes, realizing his entire racist defense strategy had just been completely obliterated by undeniable digital evidence. Connor sat frozen at the defense table, his chest heaving as the reality of his absolute destruction finally registered in his brain. His carefully maintained facade of the polite, wealthy gentleman violently shattered into a million pieces. He could not handle the humiliation of being publicly outsmarted and cornered by a dark-skinned black woman. His toxic entitlement finally boiled over. Connor shoved his expensive chair backward with a loud screech. He leapt to his feet, shoving his own defense attorney out of the way. He pointed a shaking, enraged finger directly at the witness stand and completely snapped. His face turned a dark mottled red as he screamed a vile string of horrific racial slurs directly at me. He completely lost his mind, shouting derogatory, violently racist names, letting his true bigoted nature echo off the courtroom walls for the judge, the jury, and the federal prosecutors to hear. The entire gallery gasped in sheer horror. The defense attorney grabbed Connor by the belt, desperately trying to yank him back into his seat, but Connor kept screaming violently, cursing my skin color and my sheer existence. The federal judge slammed his heavy wooden gavel down with thunderous, deafening force. He ordered the armed federal marshals to immediately subdue the defendant. 2 massive marshals tackled Connor right over the defense table, slamming his face into the polished wood and wrenching his arms behind his back. The judge leaned over his bench, his voice shaking with absolute disgust as he held Connor in severe contempt of court, guaranteeing that this disgusting public outburst would secure him the absolute maximum sentence in a federal penitentiary. The heavy wooden doors of the federal courtroom had barely closed on Connor before the swift and brutal wheels of the justice system turned their heavy focus onto my mother. 3 weeks later, Brenda sat at the defense table facing her own trial for aggressive identity theft and federal tax fraud. She wore a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit that desperately tried to mimic her former high society aesthetic. She constantly craned her neck, looking back at the heavy double doors of the gallery, expecting her loyal entourage to arrive. She was waiting for Aunt Patrice and Uncle Marcus to march down the aisle and take the witness stand to defend her honor. They never showed up. The very second the federal tax fraud charges became public record, Patrice and Marcus completely severed all ties. They were absolutely terrified that stepping into a courtroom as character witnesses for a convicted tax fraudster would trigger an immediate IRS audit into their own shady finances. Brenda was entirely abandoned by the toxic siblings she had spent decades trying to impress. She sat there alone next to a visibly exhausted public defender who looked like he had not slept in days. The public defender leaned close to Brenda, furiously whispering in her ear. I sat in the second row of the gallery, watching his desperate body language. He slid a thick plea agreement across the defense table, tapping a specific paragraph with his pen. He was begging her to sign it. The federal prosecutors had offered a generous plea deal consisting of 5 years in a minimum security facility if she admitted guilt and surrendered all remaining hidden assets. It was a massive lifeline. But toxic narcissism completely blinds people to reality. Brenda violently shoved the plea agreement back across the table. Her voice echoed sharply through the quiet courtroom as she loudly refused to accept any accountability. She pointed a manicured finger directly at the judge, declaring that she was the real victim and that she demanded a full trial immediately. She aggressively instructed her public defender to issue a subpoena for me. Brenda honestly believed that if she got me on the witness stand in front of a jury, she could manipulate the narrative. She was completely delusional, assuming she could convince the court that stealing my social security number was simply a mother collecting a rightful tax for raising a difficult dark-skinned child. I eagerly accepted the subpoena. When the bailiff called my name to testify, I walked down the center aisle wearing a pristine white tailored suit that commanded total authority. I took my place in the witness box, swore the oath, and looked directly at the jury. Brenda leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms with a smug, triumphant smirk on her face. She truly expected me to crumble under the emotional pressure of testifying against my own flesh and blood. She expected me to cry and hesitate, giving her defense attorney the perfect opportunity to paint me as an ungrateful, bitter daughter. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice or show a fraction of emotional distress. Instead, I opened my sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a heavy-bound ledger of financial records. The defense attorney approached the stand, asking me to explain my financial relationship with the defendant. I looked him dead in the eye and began to read entirely unbothered. I clinically recited 15 years of bank statements, credit reports, and forged loan applications. I did not tell a sad story. I delivered a devastating financial autopsy. I read the exact dates and dollar amounts Brenda had stolen using my federal identity when I was 18 years old. I detailed the high-interest credit cards she opened under my name to purchase Chloe's luxury vehicles and fund Chloe's private school tuition. I read the precise ledger entries showing how my wages from my 3 college jobs were aggressively garnished because Brenda had defaulted on the predatory loans she took out using my social security number. I exposed every single penny she siphoned to maintain her fraudulent upper-class facade while I starved in a tiny dorm room. The defense attorney tried to interrupt, claiming these actions were just the desperate measures of a struggling single mother trying to provide for her family. I did not even blink. I flipped to the next page of my ledger and read the medical billing statements proving Brenda had illegally drained Chloe's college trust fund to pay for multiple elective plastic surgeries and cosmetic chemical peels. The jury physically recoiled. Several jurors shook their heads in absolute disgust, looking at Brenda as if she were a monster. The narrative of the struggling, sacrificing mother completely shattered against the cold, hard reality of undeniable bank fraud and extreme maternal vanity. Brenda could not handle the destruction of her public image. She leaped out of her chair, ignoring her public defender who frantically grabbed her arm. "You owe me," she screamed, pointing wildly at the witness box. "I gave you life. I fed you and clothed you. Taking your credit was my right as your mother. You were supposed to support this family, but you were selfish. You are nothing but an ungrateful child who wants to see her own mother suffer." The federal judge slammed his heavy wooden gavel, silencing her unhinged outburst. He stared down from his elevated bench, his face tight with absolute revulsion. He looked at Brenda with zero sympathy, completely disgusted by her arrogant lack of remorse and her blatant financial abuse. He instructed the jury to disregard her outburst, but the damage was already done. The judge turned his furious gaze directly to the defense table. Mrs. Williams, the judge, announced, his voice booming with federal authority, "You have demonstrated a complete lack of accountability and a disturbing willingness to exploit your own children for superficial vanity. You rejected a very generous plea agreement to waste this court's time, and attempt to further manipulate your victim on the stand. I am officially revoking any possibility of a lenient plea arrangement. Furthermore, considering your current lack of assets and your proven history of sophisticated identity theft, I find you to be a significant flight risk." Brenda froze, the arrogant fury instantly draining from her face as the reality of his words hit her. "Bail is denied," the judge declared, slamming his gavel one final definitive time. "The defendant is remanded to federal custody immediately pending the conclusion of this trial." Two armed bailiffs marched forward, grabbing Brenda by the arms. She shrieked violently, kicking and thrashing as they dragged her away from the defense table. She screamed my name, demanding I do something, demanding I use my money to save her. I sat completely still in the witness box, smoothing the fabric of my white suit, watching her disappear through the heavy side doors of the courtroom. The sound of the heavy metal door clanking shut behind Brenda echoed through the large federal courtroom. The public defender slowly gathered his files, packing his briefcase with the defeated posture of a lawyer who knew his case was entirely unwinnable. I stepped down from the witness box, the sharp click of my heels breaking the quiet tension. I did not look back at the defense table. I walked straight down the center aisle, pushing through the heavy wooden double doors and stepping out into the bright, naturally lit hallway of the courthouse. The black tax she had violently extracted from me for 15 years was finally paid in full. I slipped my coat over my shoulders and walked out into the crisp afternoon air, ready to handle the remaining loose ends of my family tree. The crisp afternoon air felt like absolute freedom as I walked away from the federal courthouse, but my work was not completely finished. I still had one final branch of my toxic family tree to prune. I directed my driver to take me to the outer edge of the city, far away from the affluent suburbs and towering financial districts. We pulled up to a dilapidated strip mall featuring a discount grocery store, a pawn shop, and a 24-hour coin-operated laundromat. The flickering neon sign above the laundromat buzzed with a harsh electrical hum, casting a sickly yellow light over the cracked pavement. I stepped out of my SUV, adjusting the lapels of my pristine white suit, and pushed open the heavy glass door. The overwhelming smell of cheap bleach, hot lint, and damp clothes hit me instantly. There, in the back corner of the humid room, was the former golden child. Chloe was wearing faded gray sweatpants and an oversized promotional t-shirt that hung loosely on her frame. Her expensive hair extensions were completely gone, leaving her natural hair pulled back into a messy, uneven bun. She was hunched over a row of industrial washing machines, furiously scrubbing spilled laundry detergent off the scuffed linoleum floor with a dirty gray rag. The glamorous influencer who had openly mocked my dark skin and tailored business suits, who had proudly worn a $15,000 wedding gown just weeks ago, was now working a grueling minimum wage shift just to afford her next meal. Her fake wealthy aesthetic had completely evaporated, leaving behind nothing but the harsh, unforgiving reality of her own incompetence. I walked down the narrow aisle of humming washing machines, my designer heels clicking sharply against the cheap floorboards. Chloe heard the distinct sound and turned around, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. When she saw me standing there radiating absolute corporate authority, the damp rag slipped from her trembling fingers and hit the wet floor with a dull slap. "Maya," she whispered, her voice cracking with a potent mixture of profound shame and desperate, pathetic hope. I did not offer a warm, comforting smile. I stopped a few feet away from her, keeping a strict physical distance. "You look incredibly busy, Chloe," I said, my tone entirely neutral and devoid of any sisterly affection. Chloe scrambled to her feet, frantically wiping her raw red hands on her sweatpants. She looked around the dingy laundromat, tears rapidly welling up in her eyes. "I lost everything," she sobbed, taking a tentative, desperate step toward me. The influencer agency dropped me completely. Connor's parents sued me for fraud and drained whatever tiny savings I had left fighting them in court. My credit is completely destroyed because of Mom. I am living in a weekly motel, and I have to take 2 different buses just to get to this horrible job. Maya, please, you have to help me. I am so incredibly sorry for everything. I was so stupid and blind. I know I treated you terribly, but you are my sister. Can you ever forgive me? She reached out her trembling hand, expecting me to pull her into a tight emotional embrace. She expected the strong, loyal black woman trope to automatically kick in. She assumed I would eagerly absorb her pain, fix her broken life, and carry her immense burdens simply because we shared the same genetic bloodline. I did not reach back. I kept my hands folded neatly in front of me, projecting pure, icy boundaries. I already forgave you, Chloe, I stated clearly, watching the desperate confusion wash over her tear-stained face. But you are actively confusing forgiveness with reconciliation. I forgave you, so I would not have to carry the heavy toxic poison of hating you for the rest of my successful life. Forgiveness is strictly for my own peace of mind. It does not mean you get access to my life, my money, or my peace ever again. Chloe let out a choked, agonizing gasp, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. But we are family, she pleaded, her tears spilling over her cheeks. We are supposed to stick together. Mom manipulated both of us. We are both victims, Maya. We can heal together. I shook my head slowly, completely rejecting her desperate, convenient narrative. We are not victims anymore, Chloe. We are grown adults. Brenda set the trap, but you actively chose to walk into it because it was lined with designer bags and the promise of white privilege. You happily participated in my daily abuse when it directly benefited you. You relentlessly mocked my skin tone and my demanding career because it made you feel incredibly superior. You chose to be a financial parasite because it was vastly easier than working for your own authentic success. I am breaking the generational curse of toxic family loyalty right here and right now. I refuse to be the designated pack mule for a family that only values my existence when their bank accounts run dry. I reached into my sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a certified cashier's check. I held it out to her. Chloe stared at the thick paper, her hands shaking violently as she took it. She looked at the printed amount, and her eyes widened in absolute shock. It was exactly enough money to clear her immediate legal debts from Connor's parents and secure a modest one-bedroom apartment for exactly 1 year. This is not an olive branch, I explained coldly, swiftly, cutting off her incoming words of desperate gratitude. This is a final absolute severance package. I am paying off your immediate survival debts so you do not end up sleeping on the actual street. You have 1 year of rent paid in full to figure out how to be an independent functioning adult in the real world. But this is the absolute end of our relationship. Do not call me. Do not text me. Do not show up at my corporate office or my secure penthouse. If you attempt to contact me after today, my private security team will immediately treat you as a hostile trespasser. We are officially done. Chloe stood frozen, clutching the cashier's check tightly to her chest. She finally realized that my boundary was impenetrable. There would be no heartfelt sisterly redemption arc. There would be no comfortable lifelong safety net. I turned my back on her and walked proudly down the narrow aisle of churning washing machines. The small brass bell above the laundromat door chimed cheerfully as I stepped back out into the crisp afternoon air, leaving the golden child to scrub dirty floors in the bleak reality she had built for herself. I climbed into the back of my waiting armored SUV, feeling completely and utterly unburdened. The final heavy chain binding me to my toxic sibling had been permanently severed. I opened my laptop, ready to review my upcoming corporate acquisitions and enjoy my hard-earned peace. Suddenly, my secure mobile phone vibrated violently in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a routine message from my executive management team. Instead, the bright screen displayed an urgent, high-priority notification from the Federal Correctional Facility. Brenda was officially requesting an immediate emergency visitation. The notification on my secure mobile phone burned brightly against the dark interior of my armored vehicle. The message was a formal alert from the Federal Correctional Facility. Brenda was officially requesting an immediate emergency visitation. After firmly closing the door on Chloe at the dingy laundromat, I had fully intended to head straight to my corporate headquarters and finalize my upcoming international acquisitions. I had dismantled the golden child and paid off my final unwanted moral debt. But toxic mothers always have a way of demanding one last performance. I tapped the screen and authorized my driver to redirect us to the federal detention center. The prison was a sprawling fortress of gray concrete and razor wire. It was a bleak, miserable place entirely devoid of the country club aesthetics Brenda had mortgaged her ancestral home to secure. I walked through the heavy security checkpoints, wearing a flawlessly tailored crimson trench coat over a sharp black turtleneck. My designer heels clicked rhythmically against the scuffed linoleum floors. The armed guards checked my identification with a mixture of rigid protocol and quiet respect. I was directed to the maximum security visitation wing, which consisted of a sterile room divided by thick reinforced plexiglass. I took my seat on the cold metal stool, folded my hands neatly on the counter, and waited. A heavy steel door clanked open on the opposite side of the glass. Two guards escorted Brenda into the small visitation booth. The sight of her was incredibly jarring. The woman who had obsessed over high society validation, who had drained her own daughter's college fund for chemical peels and expensive nose jobs, was completely stripped of her superficial armor. She wore an oversized, scratchy orange jumpsuit. Her natural hair lacked the expensive lace front wigs she relied on to project an image of generational wealth. The harsh fluorescent lights exposed every deep wrinkle and hollow contour of her face. She looked small, defeated, and entirely common. Brenda sat down heavily on her stool. Her hands shook violently as she picked up the black plastic telephone receiver attached to the wall. I picked up my receiver, holding it loosely against my ear. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The static hum of the prison phone line filled the heavy silence. Brenda started with a shaky, shallow breath. "Maya," she whispered, her voice cracking with genuine desperation. "Thank you for coming. I did not know if you would actually show up." I kept my face entirely impassive. "I came because you requested an emergency visitation, Brenda," I stated, keeping my tone clinical. "State your emergency." Brenda squeezed her eyes shut, forcing a stream of thick, wet tears down her cheeks. These were not the fake performative tears she used to manipulate police officers or wealthy suburban neighbors. This was raw, absolute panic. "Maya, I am dying in here," she cried, gripping the plastic phone with both hands. "The food is completely inedible. The women in my cell block are terrifying. They look at me like I am fresh meat. I cannot survive 5 years in this concrete cage. You have to get me out. You have millions of dollars and deep corporate connections. I know you know the absolute best appellate lawyers in the country. You can afford a legal team that can overturn this conviction." I watched her pathetic performance without a shred of sympathy. "You rejected a highly generous plea deal and demanded a public trial," I reminded her coldly. "The federal judge denied your bail and the jury convicted you on all counts of identity theft and tax fraud. An appellate lawyer cannot erase the 15 years of forged banking documents you created under my social security number." Brenda pressed her free hand against the thick plexiglass. She leaned in close, her face contorted with desperate pleading. "Maya, please listen to me. I know I was incredibly hard on you growing up. I know I pushed you away. But I only did it because I saw how unbelievably strong you were. I knew the world was going to be vicious to a dark-skinned girl, so I had to be vicious first to prepare you. I was intentionally making you tough. And look at you now. Look at the massive financial empire you built. You are my brilliant, beautiful, dark-skinned queen. You are the absolute pride of my entire life, Maya." The words hit the thick glass and slid down like toxic sludge. She had actually said it. The woman who had actively banned me from a wedding because my dark skin did not fit her wealthy white aesthetic was now attempting to weaponize my blackness as a term of endearment. She was desperately trying to use the very racial identity she had always despised and punished me for just to access my bank accounts. It was the most depraved, calculated manipulation I had ever witnessed. She expected the deeply ingrained trauma bond to force my hand. She expected me to open my checkbook to finally buy the maternal approval I had craved as a child. I did not raise my voice. I did not express anger or sorrow. I looked directly into Brenda's terrified, bloodshot eyes. I let the silence stretch for 10 agonizing seconds, forcing her to sit in the suffocating weight of her own transparent lies. Then I spoke, my voice ringing with chilling, absolute finality. "Why would I hire a Supreme Appellate lawyer for someone who is not really family? The fake maternal love instantly evaporated from Brenda's face. Her expression twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The realization that her ultimate manipulation had completely failed, that I was entirely immune to her toxic mother routine, finally broke her sanity. She dropped the plastic receiver and slammed both of her fists violently against the reinforced plexiglass. She screamed with a raw, guttural fury, her mouth wide open as she battered her hands against the barrier, separating her from my wealth. The guards immediately rushed into the booth, grabbing Brenda by her shoulders. She thrashed wildly, kicking and shrieking muffled curses at me as the guards dragged her backward away from the glass. I calmly placed my telephone receiver back onto its metal hook. I stood up, smoothed the lapels of my crimson coat, and turned my back on her chaotic screaming. I walked out of the sterile visitation room down the long concrete corridor and pushed open the heavy front doors of the federal facility. I stepped out into the blinding bright sunlight, taking a deep breath of clean, fresh air, leaving the rotting roots of my family tree buried in the dark where they belonged. The blinding bright sunlight outside the federal facility felt like a baptism. I took a deep breath of clean, fresh air, leaving the rotting roots of my family tree buried in the dark concrete where they belonged. I climbed into the back of my waiting SUV and instructed my driver to take me directly to the affluent suburb I had legally conquered. I was not going to sell the ancestral family home. Selling it would simply hand that prime real estate over to another fake high society family eager to build their own toxic facade. Instead, I hired an elite architectural firm known for ruthless modern redesigns. I stood on the pristine front lawn, watching a massive wrecking ball smash directly through the heavy oak front door Brenda used to guard like a fortress. My demolition crew completely gutted the interior. They ripped out the suffocating floral wallpapers, destroyed the gaudy crystal chandeliers, and smashed the fake marble floors Brenda had financed using my stolen credit. We stripped the house down to its bare bones, eradicating every single trace of her desperate colorist vanity. Over the next 6 months, that hollowed-out shell transformed into a sleek corporate headquarters. I replaced the dark, imposing walls with floor-to-ceiling glass panels, flooding the space with natural light. The grand dining room where Brenda used to parade her favorite golden child became a high-tech conference center. The master suite where she plotted her mortgage fraud was converted into a secure legal clinic. This was no longer a monument to generational trauma. I officially christened it the Horizon Foundation. My mission was highly specific and deeply personal. The foundation was strictly dedicated to providing emergency financial literacy, aggressive legal aid, and elite crisis management for young women of color who were active victims of familial financial abuse and identity theft. I hired top-tier forensic accountants and ruthless defense attorneys to work in-house. We were actively hunting down toxic parents and predatory relatives who used the concept of the black tax to bleed their own daughters dry. The grand opening was a masterclass in strategic public relations. I invited every major local news network, financial journalist, and high-profile community leader. The same suburban neighbors who had gathered on their lawns to watch Brenda get dragged away in handcuffs now stood behind velvet ropes, craning their necks to get a glimpse of my success. Reporters shoved microphones in my direction, desperately trying to get a soundbite about my disgraced mother or my ruined sister. I did not give them a single crumb of family gossip. I completely controlled the narrative. When the cameras started rolling, I stood at the glass podium and delivered a flawless, commanding speech about breaking the chains of generational financial illiteracy. I spoke about empowering dark-skinned women to protect their social security numbers from the very people supposed to love them. I erased Brenda's legacy of predatory debt and replaced it instantly with my own towering legacy of economic empowerment. By the time the evening news aired, the name Brenda was nothing but a cautionary footnote in the triumphant history of Maya. The grand opening gala stretched late into the evening. I spent hours networking, shaking hands with prominent philanthropists, and securing high-level corporate partnerships. My foundation was an undeniable success. When the last catering truck finally pulled out of the freshly paved driveway, I walked up the floating glass staircase to my private executive office. The space was completely soundproof, overlooking the manicured grounds I now commanded. I kicked off my designer heels, sank into my ergonomic leather chair, and opened my laptop to review the initial donation ledger from the gala. The numbers were staggering. Corporate sponsors had flooded our accounts with massive tax-deductible grants. But as I scrolled through the incoming wire transfers, a massive anomaly triggered my internal security software. The system flashed a bright red alert across my screen. A completely anonymous donor had just attempted to wire an astonishing $1 million directly into the Foundation's unrestricted operating fund. The transaction was highly irregular, routed through a maze of decentralized digital wallets and offshore holding companies explicitly designed to mask the sender's true identity. Normal charities would have blindly accepted the massive windfall and celebrated. I am not a normal charity director. I am a forensic crisis manager who destroys scammers for a living. I immediately picked up my phone and called David, my cybersecurity director. I woke him up at 2 in the morning, but he did not complain. I gave him the routing sequence and ordered him to run a hostile traceback protocol on the anonymous digital signature. I wanted to know exactly who was trying to quietly dump $1 million into my pristine organization. I sat in the quiet glow of my monitor waiting as David's sophisticated tracking algorithms punched through the offshore firewalls. 10 minutes later, my encrypted messaging app chimed. David sent a secure data packet directly to my screen containing the unmasked IP address and the original source banking institution. I clicked the file open. The registered account holder was not an anonymous philanthropist or a benevolent tech billionaire. The money was wired from a wealth management account belonging exclusively to Connor's parents. The wealthy white in-laws were now desperately trying to funnel $1 million into my personal foundation. They were not feeling generous. They were terrified. Connor's federal wire fraud trial had exposed their proximity to his international money laundering syndicate. They knew my forensic accounting firm had the exact data files needed to prove they had actively seeded his initial Ponzi scheme. They were trying to buy my silence with a massive, untraceable bribe, hoping I would look the other way while they hid their shady business practices from the government. I stared at the blinking cursor on the screen, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. They really thought I could be bought. The absolute arrogance of Connor's wealthy parents was staggering. They had stood on their sprawling, pristine porch and laughed in Chloe's face, degrading her with racist, classist insults. They genuinely believed their generational white wealth made them entirely untouchable. They assumed $1 million would make the dark-skinned woman managing their son's financial autopsy quietly look the other way. I did not hesitate for a single second. I moved my cursor over the pending wire transfer and firmly clicked reject. The massive sum of money instantly bounced right back into their shady holding accounts. But I was not simply going to refuse their dirty bribe. I was going to completely dismantle their pristine corporate empire. I opened my encrypted email client and drafted a highly sensitive message to a senior director I personally knew at the Securities and Exchange Commission. I attached the unmasked IP address, the complex routing data David had just extracted, and a comprehensive dossier linking their elite wealth management firm directly to the offshore accounts Connor used to run his federal Ponzi scheme. I typed a brief, precise message outlining exactly how the parents had actively seeded their son's criminal enterprise using their own legitimate corporate structures. I hit send, watching the encrypted packet vanish into cyberspace. The federal audit would be quiet at first, but it would be utterly ruthless. Connor's parents were about to experience the exact same terrifying federal destruction their son had brought to my family. Every single loose end tying me to their toxic world was now permanently severed. 2 weeks later, the chaotic dust of my past had completely settled, leaving behind a polished, gleaming future. The night of the inaugural Horizon Foundation Charity Gala had finally arrived. The ancestral family home, which Brenda had treated like a monument to her fake high society status, was completely unrecognizable. My architectural team had transformed the sprawling estate into a state-of-the-art philanthropic fortress. The heavy, oppressive walls were replaced by soaring glass panels that reflected the starlight. The grand driveway where Brenda was dragged away in handcuffs was now lined with luxury vehicles and professional valet attendants. I stood inside the executive master suite on the top floor, overseeing the final preparations. The room hummed with focused electric energy. My lead assistant, a sharp, brilliant young woman named Tara, walked into the room carrying a heavy garment bag. She unzipped the protective cover, revealing a custom, breathtaking emerald green gown. The heavy silk cascaded down, pooling like liquid emeralds against the floor. "We had this tailored precisely to your measurements," Maya Tara said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "It is absolutely flawless." I slipped into the gown and turned to face the floor-to-ceiling mirror. The rich, vibrant emerald green perfectly complemented my deep, dark skin. For 32 years, Brenda had constantly tried to make me feel inadequate, insisting my complexion was a disadvantage, a flaw that needed to be muted and hidden behind conservative suits. She had worshipped Chloe's light skin, treating it as the ultimate currency. But looking at my reflection tonight, I saw nothing but pure, undeniable royalty. The gown hugged my frame, projecting absolute power and unapologetic beauty. I clipped a simple diamond necklace around my throat, a reward I had purchased for myself after closing my first $1 million corporate merger. I turned away from the mirror and looked at the people filling my executive suite. This was the exact room where Brenda had secretly signed away our family legacy to a predatory lender. Now it was filled with the only people who truly mattered. My fierce, loyal business partners stood by the glass windows, reviewing the guest list and ensuring every major corporate donor was present. Tara was organizing the evening schedule with military precision. Sitting on the modern leather sofas were three young women of color. The very first clients the Horizon Foundation had successfully rescued. Just weeks ago, they were drowning in fraudulent debt, forced into financial ruin by their own toxic parents. Tonight they wore beautiful evening gowns, their heads held high, their credit scores fully restored, and their futures entirely secure. I looked at this room full of brilliant, capable, resilient people. There were no blood relatives present. There was no mother demanding I shrink myself to make her comfortable. There was no sister expecting me to finance her delusions of grandeur. There were no toxic aunts or uncles screaming about obligations and the black tax. I had completely broken the generational curse. I was surrounded entirely by my chosen family, a tight inner circle built on mutual respect, unwavering loyalty, and authentic success. We did not demand silent suffering from each other. We demanded excellence. My encrypted radio earpiece buzzed softly. Tara tapped her tablet and looked up at me with a proud smile. "The primary ballroom is at full capacity, Maya," she announced clearly. "The city mayor has arrived along with the executive boards of every major financial institution in the district. The press pool is set up in the main lobby. They are waiting for you." I took one final deep breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs. The era of the scapegoat was officially dead. I walked out of the executive suite, the heavy emerald silk flowing gracefully behind me. I moved down the softly lit hallway until I reached the top of the grand glass staircase. Below me, the massive ballroom buzzed with the clinking of crystal glasses and the low murmur of the city elite. I stepped up to the absolute edge of the top step, looking down at the glittering empire I had built from the ashes of my own abuse. I squared my shoulders, lifted my chin, and prepared to descend. I took the first step. The emerald silk of my custom gown glided effortlessly against the polished glass steps. Below me, the massive ballroom erupted in a blinding symphony of camera flashes. The sharp, rapid-fire clicks of the photographers captured my absolute power and grace. I did not rush. I moved with the deliberate, unbothered rhythm of a woman who had completely conquered her own destiny. The string quartet playing in the corners seamlessly transitioned into a triumphant modern arrangement. Every single eye in the sprawling room was locked entirely on me. As I reached the grand landing, the societal elites parted like the Red Sea. These were the exact same wealthy socialites and corporate titans who had spent the last decade deliberately looking past me. They were the people who had eagerly fawned over Chloe because her light skin and fake designer bags fit their comfortable, digestible aesthetic. Tonight, those very same people were desperately vying for my attention. They murmured my name in hushed, amazed whispers as I glided past their tables. Wealthy venture capitalists leaned forward, offering me flutes of vintage champagne, hoping to secure just 1 minute of my time. Prominent city council members nodded with deep, respectful deference. I acknowledged them with crisp, polite smiles, but I did not stop walking. They were merely spectators in the empire I had built. My true focus was the stage waiting at the center of the room. I stepped up to the acrylic podium, adjusting the microphone as the room fell into an immediate, reverent silence. I looked out over the glittering crowd, making direct eye contact with my fierce, loyal business partners and the incredible young women my foundation had already rescued. I did not prepare a safe, sanitized corporate speech. I leaned into the microphone and spoke my absolute, unfiltered truth. Welcome to the Horizon Foundation. I began, my voice ringing with cold, clear authority. Many of you standing in this room tonight know the history of this property. You knew the woman who used to host lavish, superficial dinners within these very walls. You knew the carefully curated lies she sold to maintain a flawless upper-class facade. But tonight, we are not here to celebrate a facade. We are here to dismantle the very systems of abuse that kept that facade alive. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over the elite crowd. For too long, young women of color have been expected to silently bear the crushing weight of the black tax. We are told from a very young age that our success does not actually belong to us. We are conditioned to believe that we owe our hard-earned financial stability to the relatives who share our bloodline, regardless of how relentlessly those relatives abuse us. We are taught to shrink our ambitions to fund the careless mistakes of our toxic family members. I stand before you tonight to tell you that this generational curse ends right now. I looked directly at the front row where the young women my firm had saved sat watching me with wide, hopeful eyes. I addressed the insidious nature of colorism without an ounce of shame. I spoke openly about being the dark-skinned scapegoat in a family that worshipped proximity to whiteness. I laid out exactly how I was financially bled dry, emotionally discarded, and publicly humiliated simply because my complexion did not fit a toxic maternal aesthetic. I did not hide my scars. I held them up as undeniable proof of my ultimate victory. Blood does not make a family, I declared, my voice echoing through the silent ballroom. Blood is merely a biological coincidence. True family is forged in mutual respect, unwavering loyalty, and unconditional support. You are allowed to walk away from the people who only value your existence when their bank accounts run dry. You are allowed to protect your peace, your credit score, and your future. You do not owe your life to the people who actively tried to destroy it. For a brief second after my final word, the ballroom remained absolutely still. Then the silence shattered. The crowd erupted into a thunderous, deafening standing ovation. The wealthy corporate executives, the city politicians, and the elite philanthropists rose to their feet, applauding with genuine, profound respect. The overwhelming roar of their unified applause vibrated against the massive glass walls of the newly renovated foundation headquarters. Flashbulbs from the press pool illuminated the vast space, immortalizing the monumental shift in power that had just occurred on this stage. But their applause was not the reaction that mattered to me. I looked down at the front rows and saw the young women of color rising from their seats. Tears were streaming freely down their cheeks, ruining their expensive gala makeup. They were weeping not out of sadness, but out of pure, unadulterated relief. For the first time in their lives, someone with immense power and platform had stood up and validated their secret pain. They had been seen. They had been completely understood. They realized in that beautiful, triumphant moment that they were no longer alone, and they were no longer obligated to suffer in silence. I stepped away from the podium, feeling a profound, overwhelming sense of closure. As the thunderous applause continued echoing through the glass walls of my foundation, the master of ceremonies, a prominent local journalist, approached the stage. He held a microphone and a clipboard, looking at me with absolute awe. Maya, he said, his voice projecting over the cheering crowd. You have just launched the most powerful philanthropic initiative this city has ever seen. You have completely rewritten your family legacy and established a fortress of empowerment. The entire financial sector is watching your every single move with tremendous anticipation and deep respect. He lowered his clipboard and locked eyes with me. Everyone in this room wants to know the exact same thing. What is your next big move going to be? I smiled, letting the absolute silence stretch for a moment as I looked out over the sea of expectant faces. I held my crystal champagne glass up, catching the light of the modern chandeliers above us. What is my next big move? I repeated, projecting my voice clearly into the microphone. My next move is total global expansion. The audience gasped in collective excitement. I am officially announcing that my financial crisis management firm is opening new headquarters in London, Tokyo, and Dubai by the end of this fiscal year. I am taking the Horizon Foundation international because financial abuse and toxic family dynamics do not stop at our borders. We are going to build an impenetrable global network of legal and financial protection for women of color everywhere. My wealth and my power will not just grow, they will multiply exponentially. I will use every single dollar and every ounce of influence I possess to ensure that predators who hide behind the mask of family loyalty are hunted down and financially eradicated on a global scale. The ballroom erupted once again. Billionaires, politicians, and industry leaders raised their glasses in a massive synchronized toast to my absolute victory. I stepped away from the podium, gracefully descending the small stage to join this celebration. The rest of the evening played out like a flawless cinematic masterpiece of power and retribution. The visual contrast between my new reality and the miserable fates of my former abusers was nothing short of poetic justice. In the grand ballroom of my newly renovated ancestral estate, I stood under the warm golden glow of custom lighting. I clinked my crystal glass with a prominent state senator, laughing effortlessly as we discussed upcoming legislative changes regarding financial fraud. I turned and shook hands with a brilliant tech billionaire who eagerly offered to match my foundation opening grants. I was surrounded by beauty, influence, and authentic respect, miles away, entirely removed from the glittering world of high society. Brenda sat hunched over on a thin, lumpy mattress inside a freezing, dark concrete cell. The harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights of the Federal Correctional Facility buzzed loudly above her head. She wore a stiff, faded orange jumpsuit that irritated her skin. Her face was completely bare, stripped of the heavy foundation and expensive contouring she used to hide her deep insecurities. She stared blankly at the solid steel door, listening to the heavy boots of the prison guards echoing down the long, hollow corridor. She had traded her ancestral home, her legacy, and her freedom just to maintain a fake wealthy aesthetic. Now she owned absolutely nothing but the cold metal toilet in the corner of her cell and the overwhelming, crushing weight of her own massive ego. She pulled a thin, scratchy gray blanket over her shoulders, shivering violently in the dark. Across the city, in a rundown strip mall, Chloe pushed a heavy soaking wet mop across the scuffed linoleum floor of the 24-hour coin-operated laundromat. The harsh yellow neon sign outside flickered, casting a sickly glow over her exhausted face. She wore cheap, baggy sweatpants and a stained uniform shirt. Her hands, once perfectly manicured and adorned with a $15,000 fake engagement ring, were now raw red and blistered from hours of scrubbing floors with cheap, harsh bleach. She stopped to rub her aching lower back, looking out the dirty glass window into the rainy night she had spent her entire life expecting to be carried on a golden pedestal. Now she was completely erased from the elite world, entirely forgotten by her millions of fake social media followers, isolated and trapped in a bleak reality of minimum wage labor. Hundreds of miles away, inside a maximum security federal penitentiary, Connor walked nervously across the crowded prison yard. His tailored designer suits and arrogant tech entrepreneur persona had been completely stripped away. His head was shaved tight to his scalp, and his prison uniform hung loosely on his terrified frame. He darted his eyes, constantly checking over his shoulder, living in a state of perpetual fear. The slick, confident scammer who casually laughed about stealing my family legacy was now at the absolute bottom of the prison food chain. He had tried to play a dangerous game of predatory wealth, and he had lost his freedom for the next 20 years. Back inside the breathtaking glass walls of the Horizon Foundation, I moved away from the crowded dance floor and stepped out onto the sprawling outdoor terrace. The cool, crisp night air washed over my face. I walked over to the thick glass railing and looked out over the glittering city skyline. I took a deep, slow breath, filling my lungs with absolute triumph. I thought about the scared, dark-skinned little girl who used to hide in her bedroom praying for a sliver of maternal affection. I thought about the exhausted college student who worked 3 grueling jobs to pay off debts she never even accumulated. I thought about the desperate young woman who handed over her hard-earned money just to buy a temporary moment of family peace. That woman was completely dead. I had buried her the moment I walked away from that chaotic wedding venue. I was no longer the designated family scapegoat. I was no longer the silent, reliable automated teller machine for a mother who despised my skin tone and a sister who fed on my insecurities. I no longer sought approval from toxic people who were entirely incapable of loving anything besides their own selfish reflections. I had meticulously dismantled their fraudulent empire brick by brick and used those very same bricks to construct an impenetrable fortress of my own. I am the architect of my own empire, I whispered to the night sky. I raised my glass, taking a slow, deliberate sip of the expensive champagne. The cool, sparkling liquid tasted exactly like freedom. I turned my gaze back toward the magnificent building I now owned, watching my chosen family celebrating my immense success through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I let a genuine, radiant, and entirely victorious smile spread across my face. I had won the war. The dark sky stretched out endlessly above me, full of infinite, untethered possibilities, as my new brilliant life officially began. The screen fades black. The ultimate lesson from this story is that blood does not define true family. Maya was treated as a disposable scapegoat, expected to finance the delusions of her toxic relatives while enduring their relentless abuse. She proved that walking away from a toxic environment is not weakness, but the ultimate act of self-love. By breaking generational curses and refusing to be exploited, Maya reclaimed her identity and built her own empire. You owe nothing to those who try to destroy you. Have you ever cut off toxic family to protect your peace? Share your story below, and please subscribe today.